come on. Let's be positive. Just stop right there. No negativity. Let's be positive. LBP. Let's be positive.
Always positive from Twizel, Matt. Here we are back on the ground in New Zealand. Great to be talking to you again.
Yeah, great to hear that you're back. You had a fantastic time by the sounds of it over there. Probably not the final result that you wanted to see, but I have to say, watching that final, I thought the All Blacks were tremendous in the face of losing a man for most of the match. And, you know, I thought that had the officials not interfered to the extent they had, we could have had a classic final. But, it was a good one, but it could have been a lot better.
Well, talking about being positive, let me revisit the fact, as we've just done on the show, that today in 1999, your Wallabies won the Rugby World Cup in Paris. Now, a generation later, mate, or actually, no, they didn't. They won it in Wales playing France. That's right. But a generation later, look at what's happened. I mean, that just goes to show, doesn't it, how, you know, the administration can lose a whole sport. You're now probably in the worst position you've ever been in with Australian rugby, yet today in 1999 you were the world champs.
It's amazing how far backward we've gone in an era where the game itself has become more professional. And I struggle to understand it. I suppose the only good thing that came out of the World Cup was that Eddie wasn't going to resign, and then he decided that, okay, he probably will resign. We can clean house, I think, start fresh, start again. But I tell you what, it might be 2099 before we're close to winning it again. It's just a disappointing tournament for the Wallabies from go to woe. And when you can only beat Tier 2 nations, things aren't looking good. Not looking good at all.
Well, let's be positive then about the Kiwi. Oh, that's right. So we've just put 30 points on you, mate. That's the record score since Bluey did it in 2005, 24-0. You're still the world champions, but that's a right smack across the chops, isn't it?
Oh, just an absolute downtrend. Not many people in attendance at the stadium in Waikato to see it, but the Kiwis were just tremendous. I mean, they hardly got anything wrong all day, and Australia, well, they were never in the game. And even when they looked to try and force the issue, the Kiwis' defence just had too much for them. And I tell you what, I was perusing the stats, as I often do after the game, and, you know, there weren't too many penalties in the game, so it wasn't anything like that. But the Kiwis, they were just bigger and faster and stronger. They were more urgent. Their play the balls were much quicker. They made so much more ground every time with the ball. And they wanted it. I mean, and what a turnaround it was from the previous week. But yeah, disappointing for the Kangaroos. They'll be a bit embarrassed about that because they didn't fire a shot. They didn't fire a shot. And the Kiwis had 60% of the ball, basically, and they did everything they needed to with it. Lucky it was only 30-0.
Let's be positive then about the Black Ferns, because it's pretty much a parallel situation here. Yeah, we can still be the world champions because we've got that title for another 3 years, you know, until the next tournament rolls around. But yeah, it's kind of a little sour when you just get yourself a team beaten like that and then losing to France as well in this tournament and then getting absolutely towelled by an England side who are probably sitting there now regretting the fact majorly that they lost a player in the World Cup final last year, because who knows what would have happened. But similar kind of situation. It's the end of the season, it's a long season and everything, but the result's still going to be significant, doesn't it, Matt?
Well, it's always significant when you're the world champs and you lose, just like the All Blacks know about. If you start to slide a little bit, people don't like it. 33-12, it was pretty convincing, wasn't it?
Yeah, no question.
Pretty convincing.
Pretty convincing scoreline, yeah, for sure. And performance.
Not as convincing as the Kiwis, but pretty convincing. I mean, I suppose the question is, Martin, is why is no one talking about it like they were a little while ago?
Yeah.
Has the interest started to wane? And was the interest there because it was so front and centre for the World Cup period at home? And then once the glamour of a World Cup goes away, people are just like, all right, do we not care again?
No, I think you're right. And look, and Jamie Wall was talking about this earlier on the program as well. Look, with both World Cup tournaments, the rugby and the women's football this year, several of their mainstream media organisations, our leading organisations, have been bought and paid for. You know, those sporting bodies, FIFA and World Rugby, have invested a lot of money into these places, and so therefore saturation coverage was what was given to us every single day during the Women's World Cup of both football and rugby, there were stories, multiple angles. In fact, dominated the sports news all of that time. You couldn't get away from it, even if you didn't or weren't interested in it. However, once those tournaments leave, well, what are you left with? You're left with what you had before that. And before both of those tournaments, these sports really struggled to attract any kind of attention, let alone spectators. That's what we're left with now. You know, just before I went to France, David Dome, the Phoenix general manager, was bemoaning the fact that, you know, there hadn't been any ticket sales of note for the Phoenix women's team. Oh, no, I was reading that thinking, what? Come on, man, what, are you an idiot? I mean, you must have known this beforehand. It was never going to happen. Just because crowds turn up at Eden Park for, you know, Norway versus Switzerland in a Women's World Cup match doesn't mean that when Western Springs play Eastern Suburbs, the same kind of crowd's going to turn up. You've got to do something administratively to re-encourage people to actually want to watch the sport. And that's where it falls back to, Matt. I look at the administrations and I think both rugby and football are letting their women down.
Well, you can't compare your day-to-day operations with a World Cup tournament. You know, it's pretty simple. You know, we watch the Olympics and we watch the Winter Olympics, and there's sports that pop up that we don't see very often, and they become interesting, but only when the Olympics are on. I mean, I've played curling over the last few years, but I mean, honestly, as much as you watch it at the Olympics, who watches it any other time?
No one does,
Maybe
mate.
A few people in Europe and maybe a few Canadians, but it's not even mentioned. And I think this is what's happened with women's football, where everybody was talking about it during the World Cup. Like, you know, even people I know that don't even really watch sport were watching it, which blew me away. But, of course, now, not a murmur, not a mention, nothing. And you can't expect one-off events to build a future for you. You've got to keep working at it and growing it and improving it. And the other thing is that once the media contracts are over for those particular sports during those particular events, we tend to go back to the sports that people are interested in reading about and watching. And I suppose that's where it lies. You know, yes, we're interested in a World Cup, but are we interested in the week in, week out? Well, it just doesn't appear, though, that we are.
No, it doesn't. No. And look, and the same for men's football and the same for men's rugby. We've seen, you know, a dramatic decrease in the amount of spectators at Super Rugby, no crowds at NPC, All Black matches which don't sell out. I just think that this is where the sport is at the moment. It's not, you know, a reflection necessarily on just the Black Ferns, but that whole mainstream media beat-up, Matt, that's been foisted upon us for 12 months about the growth explosion and taking over the world and record numbers and interest, it was all hot air. Just say it out loud, people.
Well, unfortunately,
they won. Mainstream media won.
Well, they did win, and you know, at the end of the day, they're in front of more people than the alternative media, I suppose. And people do, I think, still have some belief in what they're hearing. So when the hype is built, away we go. It's easy to jump on board. I mean, I've been to the pub locally here on many occasions to watch the All Blacks, and over the last couple of years, there's been plenty of room. For the final on a Sunday morning, the local pub here, which has two quite big areas to fill, it was sold out.
There you go. That's what a World Cup does,
it was
mate.
the World Cup. They'd made the final. It wasn't expected. And as soon as the game finished, the amount of people that swarmed the centre of Twizel heading back to their normal Sunday activities, I've not seen anything like it in years. So it's events that we jump on. Mind you, I don't think too many people are watching the cricket, Martin.
Well, let's talk about that and wrap it up, shall we? How the hell do you lose a game when you hit 400 to start with? Well, you lose it when one of the other batters hits 98 boundaries, hits a century of 63 balls, and we can't seem to break up a partnership. Mate, has Trent Boult turned up at this World Cup yet? Because, you know, the guy that used to be Trent Boult was a guy that I thought would demolish most batting lineups, but this particular version of Trent Boult, and what we're seeing with that guy particularly, Matt, is that when you play clown T20s around the world, and that's what you do on a daily basis, you play school kid teams in the US, and you play, you know, guys who have been rustled up from wherever in Abu Dhabi to actually form a team and things, you aren't getting the quality competition that you'd normally get. And has that been shown up now in his performances? Well,
it could be, but this has been a particularly strange tournament, hasn't it? And there are a number of players at this tournament that you may have thought would have performed a little better than they had, including the entire England squad.
Yeah.
Who have a win over Bangladesh, and then guess what?
That's it.
Nothing else.
No.
1 win from 7 matches underneath Bangladesh, underneath the Netherlands, underneath Afghanistan, of all countries, Martin. This is the baseball bashing team that have played so well in recent times. And I even heard on the radio news last week, baseball is the hot new sporting term that's been placed into the dictionary.
Yeah, Consus Oxford apparently.
Well, there hasn't been much baseball at this Cricket World Cup. New Zealand should make the playoffs, right? Should. 4-4, 50%, 8 points. When do they play again, Martin? A couple more days.
Thursday they play Sri Lanka. Yeah, Thursday.
Yeah, they got Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka, you wouldn't say Sri Lanka is setting the world on fire, so you'd think that they will go through on that one. But are they playing good enough to win? Well, hitting 401 like they did the other day, you'd have to say 100%, and then they're Duckworth-Lewis. I mean, what's the Duckworth-Lewis? There's another name on there now too, by the way. Duckworth-Lewis and Latham or something like that, I don't remember. But how do you hit 401, losing only 6 wickets, and then give it up? As you said, they couldn't take a wicket to save their lives. But a 21-run win by Pakistan, who already had 200 on the board when the Duckworth-Lewis came up at 180. I mean, how do they calculate this? Does anyone even remember? I mean, how bizarre is that?